Welcome, everyone. I'm just going to wait a few seconds to have everyone come into the webinar, and then we'll get started, probably in about half a minute. Okay, hello, everyone, and welcome. We are thrilled to have you join us for this special event with a true legend of adventure travel, Richard Bangs. Often called the father of modern adventure travel, Richard has been recognized as one of the 100 greatest explorers of the last 100 years. He's a pioneer of adventure, co-founder of Mountain Travel Sobek, and the author of more than 20 books, including his latest, The Art of Living Dangerously. My name is Massimo Prioreschi. I'm the president and CEO of Mountain Travel Sobek, and I'll be guiding you and us through today's journey of exploration and inspiration. And we'll be giving you tips on bringing the spirit of adventure into your own life. We'll also open the floor for your questions at the end. So, Richard, let's start at the beginning. What sparked your passion for adventure? And were there particular people, books, or experiences that shaped your early dreams of exploring the world?
It's good to see you again, Massimo. It's been a long time, at least.
It sure has.
At least today.
Yesterday.
Yes, I grew up in Bethesda, Maryland, a Washington, D.C. suburb, and I was intrigued by many of the sort of mythopoetic explorers that were celebrated at that point in time, from Edmund Hillary, who summited Everest in '53, and Jacques Cousteau, Thor Heyerdahl, and other such larger than life heroes. I devoured their books and the accounts, and sort of imagined doing what they did, except for the fact that I knew that they were exceptional people, and much of what they did was inaccessible to an ordinary suburbanite like myself. The other, I think, thing that influenced me was the fact that my father was an early member of the CIA that was started as I was born. And he brought home stories and visions and information of the goings on around the world. And I was just immensely curious about how all of these things connected and what made them work, and what these different places looked like and smelled like, and what was the magic behind all of these faraway places. As you can see from the photo on the left, I also had a fascination with reptiles early on, and that will lead to Sobek, I guess, a little bit later here. But also, I was very much into Huck Finn, and I built a raft in the Potomac River and took it down the river. I think when I was 11.
You did not. That's me. That's wonderful.
I know that sort of got me started on river exploration of that sort. So yeah, let's go next slide, I guess.
So, Richard, in 1973, you founded Sobek Expeditions, which is now part of Mountain Travel Sobek. Can you share how your early experiences led to its creation and the mission that you envisioned at the time?
Sure. Well, there was really no mission per se at the time. I had been a river guide on the Colorado River to the Grand Canyon. The club I belonged to in Washington, D.C., the Canoe Cruisers Association, did the first open canoe descent of the Colorado through the Grand Canyon in 1968 or 69 or something. I couldn't afford to go, but I went to the meeting and saw the footage and thought, this is unbelievable. This is crazy what they're doing in the West Coast. So I applied for a job with the outfitter who'd taken down my club, and I had noticed that on the East Coast, there were many rivers that I had run that had similar names to the ones back west. So there's a Green River, there's a Snake River, and on and on and on. So I put those on my resume, not qualifying that they were East
East
Coast
Coast versus
waterways. Yeah,
West Coast.
and I was immediately hired through the mail. So I came out at 18 to be a river guide in the Colorado River. And while I was guiding, I heard stories of an international expedition that tried to go down the Indus River in Pakistan with Lowell Thomas, who had co-founded Cinerama, a new technique to look at movies that had 3 cameras and kind of sense around. And Don Hatch, my boss, had been on the expedition. It was a failure. They had an actor. It was the Search for Paradise, and they flipped the boat, and the actor drowned on one of the first rapids. So the thing did not work out. But as time went on, I felt that I was pretty good as a guide and mastered a lot of these techniques. There weren't many people doing what we did back then. And I was given a brochure from a rival company that was going to run the Omo River in Ethiopia. And they called it the River Trip of the Century. They were charging $3,000 a person back in 1973
Wow,
to
that
go
was a
on
lot
this
of money.
expedition. It was more than I could afford, but I thought I was qualified. So I went and visited the owner of the company and volunteered myself. And he said, well, we have a spot available, but I was pretty skinny, scrawny back then. And he said, why don't you come back in about 3 months and see if you can buff up a little bit. I was at Northwestern, and I enrolled in all sorts of physical fitness courses and drank protein shakes, et cetera. And I came back.
Gym.
I hit the gym, and I came back feeling like Rambo and presented myself to the owner of the company, and he said, "Great, you're in good shape." But I gave the last spot to my brother, so that kind of pissed me off. So I went to my friend John Yost, my high school friend. I said, "Why don't we do this ourselves and see if we can do it before Ron Smith's group does it?" And sure enough, we were able to scrape up enough sponsorship, because we had almost no money, that we could get ourselves over to Ethiopia and head on downstream. We needed a name for the company, and we thought of many possibilities. One of them was the RAW expedition, Reconnaissance of African Waterways. But yeah, ultimately,
I'm glad you didn't go with that one.
No, I am too. And we were, one of our sponsors was the Smithsonian, and they said they would not accept, or they would not prefer a sponsorship to a company called Raw. So as I was reading on ways that you could meet your demise on running rivers in Africa, certainly crocodiles loomed very large. The 150-million-year-old reptiles, perfect killing machines. Their instinct is predation. And I read about Sobek. Long had been, fascinated with reptiles, but Sobek was the ancient Egyptian crocodile god worshipped on the Nile.
Right.
And the idea was back then that if they made a sufficient homage to Sobek, he would allow safe passage. So we decided, let's call ourselves Sobek, and we did.
And ultimately protect the entire company all the time. That's great.
Hopefully, and knock on wood, so far it's worked out pretty well. So this was one of the several expeditions we did in 1973. We went down the Omo, another river called the Awash, and this is the Blue Nile, the first descent of the ultimate source of the Nile proper.
And Richard, how old were you at this point?
So I'm 22 years old in 1973.
Wow.
So
that took a lot. That took a lot of courage to start your own company, and especially, I mean, we have to remember there was no internet. This is all book research, mail, there's
Had to
no
go to the had to go to the
faxes.
library. Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Our
use the
our first
telex machine.
that's our
Um,
first communication was telex machine. Yeah,
so tell
yeah.
me, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced in those early days, and what kept you going
Um,
despite those challenges?
uh, well, um, there were seemingly infinite challenges back then because, as you well know, adventure travel didn't exist really as a vertical in the travel space. Um, all virtually all vacations, all holidays were designed to be one of two or three things: either horizontal, go to a beach and get sunburned and overeat, or take a cruise and something similar. Or there were many cultural tours, but they were almost always bus based
Hmm.
and through Europe. Um, and it was very expensive to travel overseas back
Right.
then because the airlines were all controlled in their pricing by IATA, the International Air Transport Association. And it was about $2,000 to fly to Europe back then. There was
Yeah,
common pricing.
which,
Yeah, it
yeah,
was crazy.
incredibly expensive.
Yeah. So, and we did workarounds. We used bucket shops back then where you could join a soccer team or something and pay $30 and they would backdate your membership and they could do charters. So that's how we got around back
Ah,
then. My first trip to Africa was $150 in air. So
wow, you got
using,
creative.
well, that was a hack back then.
Yeah.
So, um, but yeah, we had many challenges, particularly in Africa where we started, and the crocodiles were among them. Um, we had several boats bitten by hippos. We had people along the shores who threatened us, and of course
Yeah.
there was schistosomiasis, which is a snail-borne uh, disease, also called bilharzia, that's in stagnant water, and a couple of our guides picked up bilharzia, uh, and um, and then of course there were the crocodiles. And on our very first Omo trip, our doctor, George
Mhm.
Fuller, was making Super 8 film and was frustrated that he had no good shots of crocodiles because we carried with us what we called croc rocks, a pile
Okay.
of baseball sized rocks. And whenever they'd start to charge, we would stand up and toss rocks at them and they would dive and they were skittish and they'd go away. And they have poor eyesight as well. But George asked us to not throw so he could, I think we were 2 weeks into the expedition, so he could get the shot the money shot he was looking for. And we didn't. And sure enough, a very large croc swam up to him, their turreted eyes and their long scaly
Now, yeah.
bodies. And he opened up his jaw, and George was filming, and he closed it on the bow of the boat.
Oh no.
Uh, and uh, George's boat was stuck. Um, Crocodiles have one directional jaws that can close like an iron trap, but they have a hard time opening them up. In theory, this has never been practiced that I'm aware of, you can hold a crocodile's jaws shut with your hands. But
Okay.
in this case, the crocodile was stuck in the fabric of the boat, and he was wagging it back and forth like a dog
Like
with a
it.
rag.
Right. Right.
And I was behind him, and he's screaming, he's yelling, he jumps to the oars, he's rowing downstream, and I'm trying to catch up with him, but even though he's got a 2,000-pound crocodile hung onto his back, he is hydroplaning downstream, and I can't catch him. His wife in the front of the boat jumps to the back, grabs a metal bailing bucket, and starts whacking the croc on the head with the bucket. It, it, it finally rips itself loose. And
It's like, I'm done with this. This is not an easy meal.
yes, yeah, this is not for me. So not the snack he hoped for. Um, so that certainly put pause on how we dealt with the crocodiles going forward, and all wildlife, uh, and it put us into a more, I think, cautious mode, which has been
Sure.
fairly good for us for the ensuing years and decades at this point.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, absolutely. That must have just scared everyone to death and given you a new respect for the wild. You know, you can't control this,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
right? Let's let
Yeah.
someone else take the
Yeah.
Super 8
That 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 that
film.
photo on the lower right is on the Euphrates River. We did the first descent of the Euphrates in Turkey,
Wow.
and which flows into Syria, and then into Iraq, um, part of the Fertile Crescent.
Yeah, the Tigris and the Euphrates for sure.
That's it. And that is a gorge right behind us. Um, that is the Grand Canyon of Anatolia. And
Okay.
nobody had ever been down it. And unfortunately, we were the only people to ever run it because there was a dam that was slung up shortly after this trip.
So
Um,
you took that opportunity, and then that opportunity stopped
exactly.
existing. It looks
Exactly.
like that image on the lower left. It looks like you're going into some sort of black hole there for
Right,
sure.
right. Yeah, that
Yeah.
one is Lava Falls in the Colorado, where I was a guide for 7 summers. Yeah.
And I'm
So
just going to do a shameless plug for once things settle down in the Middle East, we do have a trip in southern Iraq that explores Mesopotamia and the Tigris and Euphrates. So shameless
what
plug there.
what you have done, which is great.
Yeah. Okay, so
So
biggest adventures, Richard. You've tackled some incredible feats, the ones that you mentioned, of course, pioneering rafting expeditions. I think Sobek holds the highest number of first ascents around the world to these uncharted destinations. Which of these adventures stand out as the most transformative for you and your team,
um,
and memorable?
yeah, well, every we like to say it's not transportation, it's transformation, because every time you head out on an adventure travel trip, you discover things about the environment through which you pass, the people with whom you travel, the people you meet along the way, and of course yourself. It's
Mhm.
um, it's almost inherently an experience that will change you, and hopefully for the better when you come out the other side, in that you've learned things that you were never aware of before, and surprised and sort of covered in discovery, hopefully. So these photos you selected are from some of our first descents. The one on the left is in New Guinea on a river called the Eater of Men. It was for a BBC special we did. Yeah. And
Oh my
interestingly,
God. We're not
yeah,
going to put that one in the catalog, Richard.
yeah, I know.
No.
No one's ever run this river again, but we had a boat capsize um, just below here, and it was barreling towards a waterfall, and it had a lot of our critical gear on it. It was upside down, so I flagged the helicopter and jumped on the helicopter and did my Indiana Jones, and that flew downstream. The boat was upside down, and I jumped out of the helicopter in the back of the upside down raft and was able to pull it over before
Wow.
before it went
Wow.
over the waterfall. So it was a classic. It was out of a script. The upper right,
Incredible. That's when you needed the Super 8 video to
I know,
capture it,
I know, and that
right?
was never captured. So it's only in my memory and people's imaginations who were there. The upper right is the Indus River in Pakistan, the first successful descent after Lowell Thomas had tried. And on the lower right is the first descent of the Zambezi River, which
Right.
that has become a very popular trip. Thousands of people will raft the Zambezi each year in southern Africa between Zambia and Zimbabwe. Um, it's um, it's extraordinary. Right below Victoria Falls is where you start.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. And I know that's very popular, and you must feel very proud to have started that tourism industry on the
Yes,
Zambezi.
it's changed the face of adventure in Southern Africa for
Yeah.
sure. It is probably the most popular thing. But this is a great slide showing the early years of exploration on rivers. But uh, as we aged, and adrenaline was not the biggest factor in exploration, at least in my realm. I started to seek out places that very few people had been to before, to encounter, experience, and understand the interconnectedness and the humanity of these other places that are often sort of looked down upon or condemned or wiped with misinformation.
Right,
I led, as you know, the first trip to North Korea, which MT Sobek offered for many years. It's not possible at the moment. Last year, I took a trip to Sudan just before things blew up. And before that, we took the first trip to Eastern Angola. Did the first trip to Libya with Americans as an MT Sobek trip.
right.
And, on and on and on. I've always
On and
been,
on and on.
yeah, always been seeking the little visited, little known, but magnificent and magical places on the planet.
I like those words together, magnificent and magic.
Yeah.
So, okay, so this is about the adventure mindset, which I think you have. And, for those of you that are listening and watching, I work with Richard, not as much as I would like to, but every time Richard is in the office, there is that sense of excitement that he brings, and like, what's next? It's never only looking back, it's also looking forward. So I appreciate that, Richard. Adventure isn't just about scaling mountains or first descents on class 5, 6 rivers. It's also about the mindset that you have, right? So what lessons have you, from your experiences, can you apply to folks in everyday life?
That's
Even
a
if
great
they're not,
question.
yeah,
Yeah,
even if they're not thrill seekers, right? Because, I'm sure many of you are looking at these images and thinking, oh, I'm not sure if I want to do that, right?
yeah, I don't blame you. And just to orient with these two photographs, the lower left is the first descent of the Yangtze River,
Oh,
the
wow.
Upper Yangtze, which we did with support from the Explorers Club. That's the Explorers Club flag. And the upper right, I'm the one on the right, was the first descent of the Alas River in Sumatra, which has the largest
Wow.
orangutan population in the world. But as to the mindset, I think curiosity is probably the most sort of potent element when you think about what does it take to step off the beaten path and um, and try something different and new. It's particularly as you age, I think you get more and more comfortable with your setting and your environment and your community, and it gets for some or many more and more difficult to leave that comfort zone. But it's only when you leave the comfort zone that you begin to see and understand uh, things that are abstract are fed to you through news media or social whatever. There's nothing like the authentic one-on-one touch with other people, with other environments, with wildlife, et cetera, et cetera. And it brings you back to this childhood state of wonder. Um, when we're 3, 4, 5 years old and we turn a new corner and see something we'd never imagined before, it just brings out this awe and this wide-eyed sense um, of original discovery. And I think every adventure travel trip offers that opportunity to sort of dial back to that time. And it exists in all of us. It's just a question of finding the motivation and being willing to take a risk. It's not a big risk, particularly with a company like MT Sobek, which makes sure that it is as judiciously operated as conceivably possible. And we have a spectacular record as a result of that. But to yourself, it's a risk to try something new and different. Will I like it? Will I be in discomfort in some way?
Right.
Will it be worth my while? It almost always is. My biggest regrets in my life have been the places that I did not go for some inane reason. I was invited, or I found an alternative, and didn't go. Experiences are much better and much more profound and much more memorable than any sort of material possession. And the time
Oh,
I decided,
absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
the time I
And
decided
I think that what you said about keeping curious, right?
yes,
And following up with that curiosity. Um, if you are able to do it live and go and if you have a curiosity, let's just say for a place in Africa, to actually go and experience that live, just being curious and then acting on that curiosity, I think that's wonderful. Richard, let's move on a little bit and talk about your ability to and this is something I admire in you, in that you are an adventurer, but then you document and you bring that to the world through your books, right? So you've written more than 20 books, and I have to say I'm working through them. I haven't read them all. What drives
yeah.
your passion for storytelling?
I'm not sure I've read them all. So, uh,
You wrote them all.
yeah, there's a lot of great adventure stories in many of these, and some of them are true. So it's worth it. Um, uh, well, first of all, any sort of adventure travel trip is a natural story. It has a beginning. It has characters that have to be introduced. It has conflict. It has challenges along the way, and it has a denouement. So it's a natural thing to be able to experience your own story by taking an adventure travel trip, and um, and to bring back your stories and to share them. You know, every bit of communication, every bit of evolution that we've experienced has been sourced from storytelling. That's how we share information. It's so much better than any sort of data or any sort of PowerPoint or any sort of abstract information that might be fed to us. There's nothing like a story, being in the story, telling the story, being part of it. And that's what I like to share. So,
And your latest book, the art of living dangerously. Can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write this particular book? Um,
uh, well,
and just before you answer that, Richard, I'm just going to say, for those of you that are participating here in this webinar, if you do have any questions for Richard or myself, just drop them into the queue, the chat, and then we will compile those and address them at the end of the webinar. So sorry for that, Richard.
oh,
The
no,
art of
no.
living dangerously.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, what precipitated this was we had our 50th anniversary for Sobek, which was last year. So it felt like it was a good moment to sort of look back over these 50 years of adventure travel, and what we did, our successes, our failures, our triumphs, our tragedies, um, and everything that's happened in that through line. And it's filled with extraordinary stories, most of which have not been told before, at least in print. So it was great to sort of mine the depths of our uh, of our
Collective
friend,
experience, right?
collective
Yeah.
experiences. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Um,
it's available now everywhere. So
av- Available at quality bookstores near
yeah, only
you.
quality bookstores. Yeah.
Um, okay, we are. Okay, and then I think we should. I know there are, especially as we get into later on in our lives, some of us want to actually document what we've done and turn to writing. So for aspiring writers out there, what advice do you have about capturing the spirit of exploration and in words, and inspiring others to follow their dreams?
Well, of this is a great selection of photos you guys have
Yeah,
chosen.
I see George
Uh,
there. Yeah.
yeah, so the upper left is on Cataract Canyon, and the Colorado River, and that's my youngest son Jasper and my wife Laura. The lower left photo is this year rafting the White Nile, um, uh, in Uganda, and that's my elder son Walker. And the right is my two partners, original partners in the founding of Sobek. That's George Wendt on the left, who's no longer with us, sadly, and John Yost on the right, who's on a river trip as we speak. So, but I think this is appropriate because we want to become evangelists for adventure travel, and you will become one as soon as you take a trip. It's hard not to be captured by the experience and want to spread that word, want to tell that story. As far as writing, because adventure, I think, runs through everybody's veins. People get excited about Indiana Jones and about Tom Sawyer and thousands of books and movies and anecdotes and fireside chats, etc. But there's nothing like being the story or being part of it, or being the protagonist. And you can easily do that by taking a trip with MT Sobek, and
it's true.
That's the start of it.
Yeah, exactly. A journey with us. Okay, let's move on to sorry, I think we jumped one of the slides or not.
I don't know.
Let's go back one. Who's ever controlling this? No, there it is. Okay. Yeah. I think we've talked about it. No, you can go forward. It's true. And I think there are different levels of adventure, right? So just here at Mountain Travel, we have levels 1 through 5. 5 would be climbing Kilimanjaro. 1 is more of a cultural adventure. Let's just say touring some of the wonderful sites in Cambodia and Vietnam and Laos. So there's really differences in terms of physical activity, but all of those trips, the 2 trips that I mentioned and everything in between, there's adventure in everything, and I think it's a mindset. We talked about that earlier. How do you balance risk and responsibility, and also just kind of environmental awareness? I know travel is not great for the planet in terms of carbon emissions, but it's great for the planet in terms of connecting people from different cultures together, understanding people. So how do you balance a sense of daring adventure with responsibility, with responsible travel and safety? Especially on the river, right? Because there are inherent risks in all travel, but Mother Nature is more present on the river.
Good. Yeah, it's a good question as well. I think without risk, there's no reward. If you want to avoid risk completely, you want to be a boat that stays in harbor and never leaves. But if you want to have your own personal evolution and begin to understand the interconnectedness of the world in some fashion, travel is the best way to do that. And certainly there is risk in anything that we do. Whenever we go out the front door, there's risk involved in that. But when you travel with a company like MT Sobek, you're traveling with a group of experts who have not only pioneered many of the destinations and activities, but have done it over and over again and have ironed out the wrinkles so that it is not only the best possible profound adventure experience, but it's also one that's as safe as can possibly be. And that's important to know. A company that's been around for over 50 years, it's really really done this over and over again. It's rinsed and washed and rinsed and washed. So it's got the ultimate when it comes to safety and responsibility and delight at the end of the day. Travelers, to your earlier mention about all travel is somewhat harmful. Yes, there are carbon emissions in it, but the offset, of course, is the fact that you get to see places that may be in trouble, they may be in danger, they may be threatened. You get to understand them, you get to appreciate them, and you probably become emotionally attached to these places and the issues that surround them. And that means that you become part of a constituency that's often needed when that threat becomes larger.
Presents itself, and
Yes,
we can comment on it, or whether we want to
exactly.
support it, right? So you're closer to that. And I
That's
think
so
also,
true.
our the fact that Mountain Travel Sobek, we're using local guides
Yes,
in the areas where we're traveling. That really ups the connection that our guests have to
yeah,
that place. And feeling connected to a place, really, you want to protect it. You want to share what you experience there,
yeah,
the values that they have. It's really incredible. It's a much different experience when you are with local people and understanding their and feeling their pride for their
yes.
for their location, and also just understanding what their challenges are, because
And yeah, and their shared humanity, and
yeah,
they
exactly,
become like family, an extended family, and you'll do everything you can to help, preserve their integrity and their authenticity and that of place, etc. So
absolutely, absolutely.
it's good for the planet, and in the larger ledger of things, um, yes,
Well, I know
there's
you and I
there
wouldn't
is
be doing what we're doing if we didn't believe that, right?
exactly.
Right. Okay, Richard, let's move on to trends for 2025 and beyond. Um, as someone who is at the forefront of adventure travel, what do you see shaping the trends for the industry in the future?
Um, yeah, so this has got. I just came back a couple weeks ago from the last kingdom of Africa, the kingdom of Eswatini, and
Hmm.
Lesotho and Zululand, and that was spectacular. That was a pioneering trip for the company. Um, uh, of course, I was with you yesterday, Massimo, and we were looking at the 2026 trips, which includes new and I find very exciting trips. Um, I've been to all of them, but we currently don't offer trips, but we will be offering trips to Sri Lanka, Colombia, Greenland, Tasmania, Romania, and others. So the company itself has always been on the cutting edge of adventure. It's always pioneered. It's been out in front of the pack. Many times we've devised, created new activities and new destinations, only to have many others sort of follow in our footsteps. But in most cases, or in many cases, we are the original explorer outfitter for these things, and we turn them around and offer those to our friends and family and fellow spirits. Um,
Absolutely.
uh, as far as me personally, I'm hoping that Ukraine is going to be a possibility sometime in the very near future. I have an invitation to travel there and look at the travel possibilities, so we'll see. Um, I am putting together with Nicole in our office a unique trip, a walking trip in Kenya for later this
Yeah,
year.
that looks fantastic,
I
Richard.
know. I'm very excited about
Um,
that. I want to go to Lake Turkana, which is where the Omo River, our first major river expedition with Sobek, ends up. And I've never been there. So looking forward to that. Trends.
uh,
Yes, sustainability is a key trend. Responsible travel is a key trend. And the combination of comfort and adventure is an ongoing trend. And I think we've figured that out. We've
yeah, and
cracked
Richard,
that nut.
you know that we really try, and no one likes discomfort, right? That's why it's called
Yeah. Yeah.
discomfort. So, but sometimes, you can't. You need to be a little uncomfortable to be an explorer, right? And
Mhm.
and that could just be taking you out of your element. It could be a little rustic lodge somewhere to get you closer to where you want to be. We as an organization, we try to work as much as possible um, with service providers and accommodations that are locally owned and have a sustainability line through them. So, in Africa, where we've got lodges that are owned locally, they support the villages around the lodges.
Mhm.
They're growing organic foods. They're just creating this microeconomy to help promote and sustain their way of life, and it's very low impact low impact in terms of energy, high impact in terms of results for the people who live there. So
Yes,
that's a
absolutely.
philosophy that we have.
Yes.
I think we can move on to.
Well, let me point out
Sorry.
that that's our catalog in the lower right there for
That's right.
2025. So if
If
anybody,
you
and there are over 120 different adventures on all 7 continents. If anybody wants a catalog, they're complimentary.
They are complimentary, and I do have to say that there is something about having a catalog in hand, and I kind of call it my wish book. Dog-eat earing the corners of the trips that I want to take, and just dreaming. It's a dream book as well. That's available. Our website, of course, is open 24/7. Has even more adventures that's in the catalog. So, just some closing remarks. You know our website, you know the catalog. We have our trip consultants, whether it's for our scheduled trips or custom trips. They're ready to make your dreams a reality. Richard, before we wrap up, we're going to do some Q&A. So I'm going to ask you some questions. So here we go. Let me just look at the file. So this, of course, I know you've never been asked this question.
Oh, no.
What's your favorite trip?
You're right. And I always come back and say, look, it's like asking somebody who their favorite child is. It's an unfair question. I have very fond memories of some of our first expeditions, particularly Ethiopia, where we did many first descents. So that always sort of rings profoundly in my mind as a game changer.
And the people there are so wonderful. I'm sure
Spectacular.
that impacted your impression of that country. It's
Yes.
the nature and the culture there is incredible.
Yes. It's the Tibet of Africa. It's got an average elevation of 8,000 feet with giant rivers that pour off the plateau, and the deepest point in Africa, the Danakil Depression, 300 feet below sea level. Wow. And the people are unique. They're unlike any others in the world. They're a combination of Semite, Hamite, and Kushite. So it's an amalgam of sort of 3 different ancient tribal groups that have come together in this one kingdom.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
I wanted to mention that one of our viewers today, Paige Viren, who's a PhD, she wants to thank you for an inspiring introduction to adventure travel class at San Francisco State University. And she wants to thank you for inspiring the next generation of adventure travel.
Oh, wow. That's great. That's great.
So
it's all about the next
to
generation.
You.
Yeah.
Okay, here's another question. So you talked about wanting to go to Kenya next. What have you learned most from your years of exploring the planet? And also as a comment, one of the viewers says they could listen to your stories all day, Richard. So if you can kind of, in a nutshell, say, what have you learned most?
I guess the one lesson that always comes back is it's always good to have forward momentum. Whenever there's a crossroads, whenever there are decisions as to whether to stay or to go, it's almost always better to go. And
that's really good advice.
Yeah.
Just do it.
Just do it. Exactly. Yeah. Let's use that as a tagline. See what happens to us.
No one has that one.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I think that's a wrap for us. Thank you, everyone, for attending this webinar. And when in doubt, just as Richard says, when you're thinking about adventure, whether it's something small or something larger, just do it. You won't regret it. And thank you so much, Richard, for your time today, and everyone else on the webinar. You know where to find us, and keep in touch and keep adventuring. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Massimo. Okay. All right.
Okay.
We did it. Our first one, huh? Our first descent.
Yeah, I think we did really well. We might still be on, Richard.
Oh. All right. Huh.
You could click the leave button.
Okay.